Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the playing of our national anthem.
Baseball fans, you're listening to Babes.
Welcome back, everyone, to Babes. We're here for episode 3 and lucky number 3 because today we are very excited to be joined by a special guest, John Kovach, who has generously agreed to let us pick his brain and chat all things baseball, but especially women in baseball. John is an archivist and a baseball historian with over 2 decades of experience, and most recently, he conceived and curated the Women in Baseball exhibit that we mentioned on our previous episode that is soon to be featured at the Reds Hall of Fame Museum. So we just cannot wait to learn as much as possible from you today in our time together. And first off, we got to know the basics. John, how did you become a baseball fan? How did you fall in love with the game?
All right. So, it was like one of those things that just kind of grew up with the game, played youth baseball, park ball. And it was interesting because besides enjoying playing, I also was fascinated with the historical part. There was a neighbor of mine growing up who had this baseball game that his dad had played, and it's like a Stratomatic, little circles, and they were like number 1 to 14, and you would place them down and you would hit the little spinner. 1's a home run, 2's a ground ball, three's a fly ball, and so on down the line. And the players though were from the I would say 20s through the 50s. So I got to know these names just like I would know players today. It's like, Gus Earl. I know Gus Earl. Johnny Sain. So it was a combination, and those two things just kind of clicked. And I've been fortunate that I have been able to dovetail that into to a love that continues today.
Very cool. I love asking that question because obviously there's a through line for all of us, and it's always something that kind of started in childhood and ties back to those memories, but there's always a good story behind it. And I love that. So John, what inspired you to commit so much of your work specifically to the history of women in the sport of baseball?
All right. So I'm glad you asked that. So when I was going into the 8th grade, my elementary school was going to close. And so for that 8th grade year, we were not going to be able to complete. And so we were going to be divvied up to other schools. And so there was the school I ended up going to was Measle Elementary. And to help transition us, there was a counselor by the name of Lib Mahon. Miss Mahon was absolutely wonderful. She made everyone who was transferring over to Measle feel very, very comfortable. And, wanted to find out what you liked. And, I told her I like baseball. And she said, well, yeah, I like baseball too. So that was our first connection. And so periodically I would see her at school, and I would go in her office and we would chat ball. And the more we talked, I'm thinking, this lady knows a lot about baseball. Come to find out.
Boy, do you think?
Lib Mahon was Elizabeth Mahon, who played for the South Bend Blue Sox. I ran across her photo. I was doing a Mr. Woolley's history class. We were doing a report, and I'm flipping through the newspaper on microfilm, and I look at this picture of this woman. I'm thinking, I need to make a copy of this. And so I made a copy, and the very next day I took it and I said, is this you? And she says, yeah, I play baseball. What? You didn't tell me this? She never mentioned that. And come to find out, we had another teacher at the school, a PE teacher by the name of Betsy Jockum, who also played on the Blue Sox.
Betsy Sock'em. Sock'em Jock'em.
Jock'em. You bet. And so it was really fun not only make the connection with them, but it was a connection. I kept with and I to the day she died, I still called her Miss Mahon because I could not bring myself to call her Lib. She kept telling me I could do that, but I couldn't. She was still Miss Mahon to me. And Betsy Jock'em is still living in South Bend. I think she just turned 100, 101 or 102.
102, I think.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So it is just fun, the connections that you make. So that was kind of like my first involvement, but it really wasn't until, as far as current players, in the 1990s, early years of the internet, I kept running across these like little posts about female baseball players, and I was just really fascinated. And it was a gentleman up in Michigan who I started connecting with, and he says, "Yeah, we've got a small women's league up in Lansing." And he said, "I'd really like to start a Midwest league, kind of based on the cities that were in the All-American League." So in 1996, we launched the Great Lakes Women's Baseball League. Had a team in Fort Wayne, team in South Bend, team in Lansing, Michigan, and then a team in team in Chicago. And so, we began to play. And that very first year, I had a couple of younger players, and at the end of the season, one of the moms of one of my high school players brought me a little female baseball figurine. Well, up until that time, I had collected a lot of baseball-related material. Something about this figurine kind of clicked and changed my entire collecting habit, because within the next 3 or 4 years, pretty much all my other baseball stuff was out the door, and I was locked into women's baseball. And it's fun whether you look at an image. I want to know more about it. Postcard, the Western Bloomer Girls. Who were they? Where do they play? Who were some of their key players? It's just that, and so you got that love of history and the love of baseball just kind of constantly meshing together.
So, John, can I back us up really just briefly? Can you explain to our listeners, just give a little bit of background on your teachers, Betsy Jock'em?
Okay.
Yeah.
Betsy Jock'em was an outfielder, and she actually also pitched for the South Bend Blue Sox. I think she played from 43 through 1948. She actually won a batting title, and because she was such a good hitter, the Sock'em Jock'em nickname was bestowed upon her. Lib Mahon was a left fielder, again an all-star, a fair number of years with the South Bend Blue Sox, and again in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. You had two communities that were, I think, really key, South Bend and Rockford, Illinois, because they were the only two cities who were in the league for the entire duration of that league. Okay. And kind of fast forwarding it to another element, history related, the women of the league had gone to Central Michigan University to get some of their things cataloged, kind of prepping what was going to go to Cooperstown. But their grant was running out and they needed a home for their collection. So unbeknownst to my museum director, I took it upon myself to say, you know what? I think that collection belongs here in South Bend. And because I knew Miss Jock'em and I knew Miss Mahon, and several other players who were actually still living in South Bend, I convinced them to put on loan, at least for a while, their collection. Now, my director, Kathy Mullins, was very strong in women's history. However, sports, it just didn't click. And she could not understand why we would want all this baseball stuff. And I said, Kathy, this is a special collection. They want to donate this here down the road. If you have it, you will never, ever regret. Well, I can tell you that today, the Center for History in South Bend, They are the repository of this collection, and it is the most consulted collection of everything they have.
I believe it. I mean, sports is just such a huge part, and baseball specifically is such a huge piece of our country's history, right? It's America's favorite pastime.
And I was trying to tell Kathy that, the key thing is that, to me, the collection really should be in only one of two cities, South Bend or Rockford.
Yeah.
And basically, when I was sitting down with some of the former players from the league who were kind of making that decision, I said, I can't tell you what Rockford has to offer, but here's what we can offer here in South Bend. And so because we had kind of built a little bit of trust, that's where the collection ended up. And so I said it was just really, really cool. And there have been a couple of big reunions in South Bend, including the 50th reunion for the league. And during that reunion, I came so close to having Jeannie Fout pitch for my over 30 baseball team. I kind of broached her kind of in jest. I said, hey, Jeannie, would you like to throw an inning on Sunday for me? And she looked at me and she said, and when you start talking baseball with these women, it's just like you have moved the clock back 50 years. She said, I still throw with my grandson every day. And you know what? I throw the ball pretty damn hard. So I said, let me see if I can rearrange my flight to Phoenix. So she worked for several hours trying to tweak her flight so she could come and pitch in a baseball game. I will never forget that interaction with Jeannie Fout.
That's incredible.
And Jeannie
I'm sure she could still throw some heat.
I do every so often. I'll see where she's throwing out the first pitch, and I thought, oh, yeah, they should have signed her to a contract. I mean, if they signed double duty Radcliffe to a contract and Minnie Minoso, why not Jeannie Fout?
Excellent question.
What honor that would be. But Fout was probably the greatest pitcher when the league finally went to the overhand pitching. That's what she was used to doing, because she started out playing mostly third base, and it was a decent hitter. But boy, as a pitcher, she really sparkled. 4 no-hitters. One year, I think she had an earned run average. She was like 20-2, and her earned run average was 0.96. That's less than a running game. Who does it? As a start,
were there a lot of two-way players in women's baseball?
You would have a number of players who kind of filled the bill. Some of it kind of came down early on. You would have players who, like in the early years, they were using like a softball delivery. So they figured you were not having to train as many pitchers to actually pitch overhand at that point in time. But the other component, as the league went on, the pitching distance moved back, and as it moved back, you went from the underhand to sidearm to then the like a traditional overhand. But you would have players who would dabble in double positions. Some folks would just pitch. Other times, you might find yourself in a game just because you're needed. But they were good athletes, so they could make that adjustment.
Take that, Shohei Ohtani. That's what I'm thinking. Like, no big deal.
Nothing on us. So I'm intrigued too by like the etiquette training and like all the extras that they had, on their plate. In addition to just being out in the field all day long, then they had their etiquette training as well.
Well, it was interesting because I guess Phil Wrigley, he was a lot of folks have the impression, I think, about Wrigley is that he was really into women's rights, and that's why he helped fund this league. No, it really came down to dollars and cents, because his fear was Major League Baseball is going to shut down. What am I going to put in my park?
Mm-hmm.
But when Major League Baseball continued, the light bulb went on again. He said, now wait a minute, there's part of the season where there's nobody playing here. And so I think his intention would have been to utilize the major league parks for women's games as well. The first night game in Wrigley Field was played by the All-American League, And then they in 43, and they came back in 44 and did it again. And
Yes. So quickly, I want to ask, did you ever speak to Miss Jocham about her experience playing?
yes, I did.
Yeah.
And she told me a lot about the lights. That she said, yes, those were portable lights, and they were not necessarily very good. She said, tracking a ball in the outfield, ball would go up and it would go into this darkness, and you're still moving back because you're going to have to figure out where's it going to come out of the lights. Lib Mahon would tell me about when they would play games in Kenosha, the fog rolling in off the lake. You would sometimes lose an outfielder or two, and you'd have to yell just to make sure you knew that they were actually there.
There's no warning track for fog, right? Like
No, there's not. It drifts in and drifts out. But yeah, there were so many things with Wrigley wanting to keep that feminine touch. And so I actually asked quite a few players about the skirts. And I said, what did you think? And they said, at first, it was like, all right, so this is a chance to make money playing ball. All right, I'll do this. But they said the more they did it, they said, no, we didn't have as many issues with this as he said, made it easier to run. However, sliding, on the other hand, was a different story. And you may have seen the photo of the All-American player laying on her side with just an unbelievably large strawberry on the side of her leg. Yeah. So there are some downsides to it, but like I said, they overall, the players that I've spoken with said, yeah, they were able to make that adjustment, and it wasn't as bad as anticipated. And early on in South Bend, as you followed the team, like in the newspaper, you did get this kind of tongue-in-cheek, female baseball players, blah, blah, blah. Within the first month and a half, the gentleman who was probably the Jim Costin was his name. He was the kind of the be-all, end-all sports editor in South Bend. And if Costin liked it, everybody got on board. That's how well loved this man was in the South Bend community. It didn't take him very long to say, hey, these are good ball players. And every so often you would have, for instance, Stanley Kovaleski, who was a Hall of Fame pitcher living in South Bend. He would be out at the game and he would say, hey, that shortstop's just as good as Sewell, who played for us in the 20s. And so I think that was the part that maybe really didn't anticipate. And the quality of the players, and having the component of kind of the league running everything from a central operation was key, because you could control so many aspects. If a team was struggling, you would take just some better players and move them along to a team that was struggling. Where could you imagine that in the major leagues today? It's like, we feel really bad for you. Let's take Ohtani and let's send him to Texas. Yeah. It's just not going to happen. But that was the competitive aspect kept the fans coming into the ballpark. Because then, who wants to go watch a team that's not going to play well? And so I think it was in 48, the league actually outdrew a number of the minor league systems in the United States. But as time went on, and the ownership kind of reverted back to individual communities, well, then you started getting that disparity of how you were going to spend your money to operate your franchise. You put some money into it, you were going to reap some benefits. But if you look at some of the later photographs, you'll see even some of the uniforms, they look to be somewhat incomplete. They're not quite as nice as some of those first years. And travel as well too. You go from traveling in a nice bus to traveling in cars. And the whole aspect that after 1954, while they did not come back and play in 1955, the premise was they were going to suspend play. So the idea was it was going to start again. And so a touring team traveled around for a number of years. But when you get a couple, 3 years past the league, and again, the league was just in the Midwest, it's going to be quickly forgotten. And so that, again, when the movie A League of Their Own came out, that just kind of resurrected not only a lot of memories, but stories from, the women that played. That just kind of gave them it's like what I did was important. And I think that's key. That is so key.
Yeah. Now, did you ever have the chance to speak with former players about the movie, how they felt about it? Did Tom Hanks do them justice?
Well, they said, we know that there's a lot of Hollywood in this. And they were very specific. They said, well, this would not happen. He would not come into our locker room. They were very adamant about that being the case. But they felt pretty content with, I think, a lot of the play that went on. And it was a lot of fun. I knew a handful of the players who actually had cameo roles, like either at Cooperstown or in and around that venue. So that was kind of fun to be able to, for them to have that opportunity. And I think the stadium down in Evansville, where quite a number of the scenes were filmed, the last time I was there, they still kept the signage from the movie up because, cool. Photo op.
Yeah. Wow.
Walk back there, and again, the stadium itself was built in 1915. So with the signage, it's like you're in the era.
That is so cool. I'm going to have to check that out.
For sure.
Well, Jonna, do you want to dive into John's most recent project, the Women in Baseball exhibit, which, as we mentioned, was conceived and curated by you at the Reds Hall of Fame Museum? And we were reading that it features over 200 artifacts. So we wanted to ask you just about like a few of your favorites. Are there any that stick out to you that we should make sure not to miss?
All right. All right. So putting this exhibit together, like I said, it's probably the largest one that I can think of. And again, I'd have to go back to that Berrien County one in terms of number of artifacts, but there are some really unique pieces. And what I wanted to show in this was not only a timeline of the history of the female players, but to show people who may not really realize that there are other components of females in baseball that you might not think of, such as music. There are some, there's a sheet music piece from the 1880s, one of the earlier pieces written by a female. Sadly, when in that era, when a female would have a piece of music that she has written, unless you had a very distinctive name, and I think this woman's name was Smith, the sheer odds of finding out who she is, the publishing company had publishing houses in Chicago and New York, trying to figure out where she might be from. It's still on my to-do list, but that's going to be a little tougher nut to crack. There was a vaudeville performer by the name of Ray Cox, and when I first saw an Edison cylinder with Ray Cox on it, I just made the assumption that it was a male. It's like, no, and Ray was her name. She was what they call a Southern dialect comedian. However, she was from the Chicago area. Huh. So she must have been very good at a Southern accent, because you see this constantly in these newspaper reports about her. And I was like, no, see, I have the census record with her and her family, and this is where they're from. Eventually, in the census, she kind of goes from being born in Illinois to being born in Louisiana, because, well, that fits the motif of what she wants to do publicity-wise. But she has a routine called the Baseball Girl, and actually you can YouTube this and find it. She wrote this, and it's funny. It is really well done, and a number of folks who kind of researched that end felt that this would have been a piece, for instance, that the Who's on First routine could have had something to do with. And again, written by a female, and this is like 1907, 1908. You can look at things like other things in popular culture, movies. So yeah, you have the movie A League of Their Own, but you can start to kind of move backwards. I think around like 1916, 1917. That's one of the first movies that feature females playing ball. But think about the 1970s, 1980s, Bad News Bears. And it's that story of that single female baseball player sort of thing. And that's just, that in itself is an interesting component where it's like a lot of times you don't see that female team. It's just that one player. And you kind of wonder what, why is it that component? And I think a lot of it has to do, at least here in the United States, is with how we have been brought up. Baseball's for boys, softball is for girls. One of the things I like to do in a talk is I will start out, and especially if I'm doing it for younger people, I will have two little stands. On one stand is a softball and one stand is a baseball. And my first question to them is, are these the same? These kids are smart. And they're going to say, no, one's bigger, one's smaller. They're not the same. I said, well, you guys are a lot smarter than a lot of adults, because so many adults equate a bat and ball sport for females, not baseball, but softball. And if you think about it, think about female football players, hockey players, basketball players. Most of the elements of those games are the same. Baseball and softball have a lot of similarities. You have the pitching distance is going to be longer on baseball than it is on softball. Bases are going to be different sizes. Bats will be different. And actually your approach to the game, because you're on a smaller field, is vastly different than on a baseball field. Typically, if you go to like a fast pitch softball game, let's say a college game, hard hit ball to right field, there's a pretty good shot that a right fielder might come in and try to throw a run out first base. Probably not ever going to happen, or unless Miguel Cabrera is running down to first base, it's going to be very difficult to throw a runner out of first base in baseball. And so baseball, female baseball players have to wrestle with this other sport that's out there that has enough similarities that people just equate them as playing it only because they're female. I've had a number of players who, for instance, high school age, they would have jobs during the summer caddying. And of course, you're caddying for some Cokes, and they'll probably ask you, you play any sports? And he said, John, I don't understand. I look right in the eye. I say, yeah, I play baseball. And they'll come back and say, so how many softball games do you play a year? It's like they don't hear that word. A few years ago, I had a player out of New York who wanted to do the pitch hitting throw competition, and she went to it in her community, and they gave her softball. And she said, "What's this?" Because she was playing baseball. She said, "Well, this is what you have to throw." She said, "But I don't play this." Well, apparently MLB felt, because they were not seeing enough females in the finals, said, here's what we'll do. We'll just do this. Boys will throw the baseball and hit the baseball, and girls will throw the softball and hit the softball. And that really bothered me. So I started, well, harassing would probably be the easiest word to describe it. Harassing MLB about this. And they kept giving me interns who, worked in an office. And so I would give them the story. And I said, there are a lot of things wrong with this. I said, what happens if one of these girls who's a baseball player is literally forced to throw a softball in your competition and gets hurt? There could be some legal issues. So I went through, oh gosh, it was probably 2 or 3 of these interns, and finally got somebody in labor relations, who I'm sure at this point in time, this gentleman still works for MLB, who will remain nameless because I'm sure he just really hates the day he gave me his email. I was able to contact some folks at Aquafina and was able to find somebody who was interested in the cause. They felt that, yeah, that wasn't right. And when I tried to pitch to them, I said, I understand why you did what you did, but the easiest thing that you could have done is to do a boys baseball and softball division and a girls baseball and softball division, and everybody's happy. And it's like they never thought of that. It's like this is the easy fix, guys. How does this one slide past you? But this person at Aquafina apparently made a couple of calls to MLB and expressed their concern. And I think it was in early 2014. So it's like roughly a 3-year battle. They backed down and said, yep, girls can again do the baseball. So, and again, not something that's going to make the news. Didn't want it to make the news. I like working the stuff behind the scenes. It's so easy, and there are a number of folks who work in and out of girls baseball who I think while their heart is in the right place, I think that a lot of it is kind of a self-promotion as well, and I'm a little bothered by that, because to me, I'm going to defend my players first and foremost. It's always about the kids, young women who are going to play for me. I'm going to do anything I can for them to be able to reach whatever goal they want.
You read my mind, because I was going to ask you about like the designated differences between baseball and softball, but to kind of elaborate on that, you mentioned that obviously it's much more common that girls get involved in softball because that's what's available, that's what's common, that's what we're raised with. So how do girls get into baseball rather than softball, and what kind of resources are available?
What is interesting is if you go to, and I really hate to use as my bashing post Little League baseball, but since they were kind of like the first in line, that's what usually happens. So if you would go to a Little League baseball sign up, and let's say you have a random little boy and random little girl with you, all right? You walk in the door, and I'll guarantee you, whoever's directing you to the tables, if you don't ask about baseball, they say, oh, little girl, softball's over there. So you get sucked into the system before you even know. So you have to have some like prior knowledge walking in the door. I had a daughter who went through that in a youth league in northern Indiana, and I was sad because she did not have an opportunity to play in that league. She aged out because we decided to do the full legal battle, because that would ensure that anybody after her was going to have that opportunity. And she had signed up for this league. She had been playing Little League. And then the following year, she had played travel baseball. So travel ball for 12 and under, you're pretty much playing regular baseball rules. So you have the leadoffs. It's a different cadence than a Little League, where, you don't take the leadoff at the same time. It's just a different animal. It's a little bit slower game. And so there was a community nearby that had a youth league that had what I would call a pony-sized field, which was nice because it was a step up, and it would have been like the step right before the full-size field. So I thought that was that would have been a good jump for her. And they said, well, yeah, we know all about the fact that she plays baseball, but she can't in this league. Baseball's for boys, softball's for girls. And again, to be hearing that in the early 2000s is just blew my mind. Back in 2004, I co-wrote with a couple of other folks from the Women's Sports Foundation, the position paper on the differences between baseball and softball.
Very cool.
And so, yeah, when you line them up side by side, it's definitive that these are different games. I mean, you can approach some aspects the same, but a lot of things you approach differently. You just do. There have been a couple of times where I ended up coaching softball, but sadly, I coached like a baseball coach. And I would go round and round with older players who said, well, you can't do that, coach, because that's not what softball players do. And I said, well, I'm not a softball player. I'm a baseball player. And again, trust me, because this will work. I said, it's just an interesting animal to see how, despite so many things changing, that this is, and it's a game. I mean, it's a game for kids. When you walk into the door of a youth league, you should be asked, male or female, baseball or softball. Make a choice. It's a choice. It's not a career path. A lot of the young women that I've coached, especially if they're good baseball players, you get oftentimes parents who have softball players that, man, that player would really help our team. And so you end up getting these sadly misleading statements how, wow, your daughter, if she comes and plays softball, she'll get a full ride to college. And I pulled my parents aside and I said, I've coached collegiately. I try to stay away from full rides. I said, that player has to be so exceptional for me to want that player so much. I'm going to split scholarships because I can offer more financial aid to more players. But the other concern that I sometimes have is, and I've had girls who will, they'll try and play both fast pitch and play baseball, and they'll do it on the same weekend. And eventually, I'll sit them and their parents down. I said, listen, guys, I love your daughter playing baseball for me, but you guys really should choose. I said, I don't want to see her get hurt. Right. Because if she blows out an arm, there goes the softball as well as the baseball. Pick one. And dedication. I mean, if you truly love baseball, I said, I will always find a place for you to play. Softball, you're on your own, but there are a lot, there are options for you. But I just feel that, sometimes you have to make that choice. And and there are quite a number of girls who don't. I mean, they will go on. And I said, if they're pretty good, I'll give them a read. And I said, all right, so what are your plans, let's say, after high school? I'd like to play in college. All right. So let me give it to you straight. If you're going to play in college, because the further you go up, you're going to have even more pushback. When I was going to American baseball coaches meetings, I remember the first time I broached a couple of coaches about a couple of good female baseball players who were in high school. And they did this like look around and they said, come, let's go down here. So we go down this kind of like darkened hallway to talk about this, because it's like they don't want anybody to hear that they're maybe considering talking about a female baseball player. And I can still remember one of the meetings, and it took about 3 years to build up enough camaraderie with these 2 or 3 coaches that we actually went out to dinner together. So we were in public talking about this issue. And I tell the girls, I said, if you think it was a struggle in youth ball, high school, I said, the issue you have is a coach has to let you try out. But I said, the issue is in his mind, he may already made up his mind that he does not want a female player. And so I've actually talked with a couple of attorneys. I said, all right, so how do you parse that aspect out? Because the coach may realize, I said, all I have to do is let him try out, but I'm not going to. But in his mind, he said, I'm not going to keep him. How do you parse that out? I would love to know the answer of that, because that would, I think, open some more doors for those girls. But I said, let's say you get past high school. Now you've got college. You a good student? I hope so. I said, Division III, purest form of intercollegiate sports, NCAA Division III. You are a true student athlete. It's not an athletic scholarship. You're going to get that scholarship for your academics. And I said, I'm in contact with enough coaches that I will work hard helping you put together a videotape and calling the coach and saying, hey, listen, I know this is something you may not have ever seen, because again, how many of these coaches have ever seen a strong female baseball player? Very few. And I think you have to be open to that aspect. If you want to better your team, you look at everybody. And
yeah, absolutely.
If you're throwing the ball, let's say, 85, 88 miles an hour, and you could throw strikes. Well, I have a lot of boys playing for me this year who struggle with that, and I would say, no, you said, give me strikes first. We'll build the velocity into this. You throw strikes. Your fielders are always going to be ready on every pitch to field the ball. I said, your coach has played behind those pitchers who walk 12 or 14 batters in a game. And I said, it's hard to concentrate. I don't care how into the game you are. When there are that many walks, it's hard to keep that same focus, for sure. But yeah, I said I would work whatever I needed to for my players who want to keep pursuing that ahead. And he still can have enough connections in the women's leagues. I said, let me hook you up with a team in whether it's Washington D.C., Rockford. Always looking for good players, and because of the relationship that I have with some of the coaches who a lot of times were former players of mine, they're going to trust that I'm telling them that this is going to be a solid person for their ball club.
Is there more opportunities? There's obviously more women in like public facing roles more now than ever, specifically in coaching. So are there more opportunities, maybe not necessarily to play, it sounds like, than there was like 20 years ago when you were going through that with your daughter, but in coaching, even if it's not playing post high school, post college, is that something that some of your players are still interested in?
I've actually had two of my former players who have been major league scouts.
Wow.
And Robin Walls, who's on the East Coast. Robin played for me, and actually she was what we call in the women's baseball world, she was a baseball lifer. Never didn't play softball. She's worked as a GM, but Robin Sharp, she played on women's baseball team USA early on, and did a nice job. And Kelly Rodman, who sadly passed away in the last year or so. I absolutely adored Kelly Rodman. She played for me in a couple tournaments, and the thing I loved most about her, sometimes playing tournaments down in Fort Myers, we'd go back to Old Terry Park. No game would be going on. We would sit there, and she would just want to talk about old-time baseball players who might have played at that stadium, and just her love of the game. And I know she was so excited to get into scouting, and the Yankees thought a lot of her, for sure.
My one of my favorite movies is Trouble with the Curve. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. I'm sure you have, but Clint Eastwood's daughter, Clint Eastwood, is the scout, and she becomes a scout. And so after that, I toyed around with the idea of going to scout school myself.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that go into the scouting. Now, technology-wise, I mean, there's so many little nuances where you look at and I think it's at the Hall of Fame. It may be Tom Seaver's card when he was being scouted. he was not highly rated. I mean, Tom Seaver, it's like, yeah, this guy's average. He might not amount to anything. I still like to go on what I see. I take advantage of video of my pitchers, video of my hitters, so we can make little adjustments along the way. But I'm going to stay in the old school. It's like I'm going to go by my gut. Is that gut always right? Nope, but it's right more times than not, and so that's what I'm going to do, because you can almost have too much in terms of, I think, statistics and knowledge, and you then kind of get past the game, because it is not just the numbers game. There are those little pieces of the player's personality that they don't fit anywhere, and you
Right.
have to know those things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and how the game is, I don't know, seemingly changing, because it seems that there's just too much reliance on analytics and not enough, to your point, on personality and just different aspects.
So I know I would hate to be in any of these contract meetings, because you're just going to get data spewed at you. And to be honest, I mean, I know the individuals, for instance, on my team who are going to be those clutch RBI hitters, and those folks who will get that RBI, when we're 10 runs ahead. You in the dugout, that, and I wonder how much the hands of today's managers are tied because of the analytics. And it's like, well, what, are you just kind of keeping the clubhouse happy here, and basically you're just kind of following a book on how to manage? That would not be for me. That just would not.
I agree. I think the game has changed a lot, and that role specifically has evolved a lot, even in just the last few years. It's been crazy to watch and see and hear all of the ways that analytics continues to.
Well, and it's funny, of course, this year, the shift is not going to be into play. And it just drove me up a wall. I'm thinking, all right, I've got nobody at third base. I'm going to bunt all day. Base hit. It's like, well, you're taking away their house. I don't care. Get a runner on base. Play the game. It's so I'm happy at least to kind of see it. All right, so you've got to start with the infielders on the same side of the field. But why anybody side? If I got 8 people standing on this side, why do I want to try to hit it over them? But I have all this open space here. And they'll say, well, because the pitcher's, throwing the inside. You mean they don't teach anymore how to go the other way on an inside pitch?
Yeah, it's a little too much strategy sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, a lot of the elements of the game, I said it's still interesting to watch and try to figure out, what moves somebody might be making. There were times, I know, when the last couple of years when I had a tournament team with one of my former players, who was her name was Kate Harris, and she was just a really outstanding baseball player. And if she wanted to really pursue it, she'd be an outstanding baseball coach. We worked together coaching like a 12U team, where she was the head coach, I was her assistant. And then when we did our 18U team, I was the head coach, she was my assistant. But the very last year, I don't think she really realized that she made the bulk of the decisions for our 18U team. My parents were quite surprised, because Kate, when we worked together, Kate was, I think, 19 or 20. And I put her on third base to coach. Well, I had always coached third base. My parents were always used to me coaching third base. I was over at first base. I'm just clapping my hand. Kate, you call what you need, call what you want to call. You get to know these girls, and then they were just very, very vested in her. And wish we would have been able to kind of continue down the road, because again, I think she would have really done well with those kids, and I would have been content to kind of go back and work with like the 10U, 11U, and kind of develop a feeder system for her. But yeah, there were times where that last season we worked together, I would throw a lineup down and she'd look at it and say, well, why aren't you playing so-and-so here? Okay, we'll make that change. And I did that all season long. I really don't think she realized that, she was setting the lineups on the field. I was suggesting a lineup to her, who I was grooming to be the head coach. But that's another aspect too. I think that those young ladies who play become the role models if they're able to get into the coaching end as well too, because again, they're going to have a shared experience that I can't offer. So like with my the 12U girls that I was coaching, I could tell them about my daughter's experiences, but I couldn't tell them from my experience. When Kate and I were together, Kate lived that experience. And so that was a unique bonding mechanism for her and the players to be able to, it's like, I understand. I can say I understand, but I don't understand to the same degree that Kate would
have. That makes me wonder. So women like Rachel Balkovich, coaching for the Yankees single A team, what kind of contributions do you think women are able to make on that level at this point? And she's a former softball player, so.
Right. Well, and what's interesting is watch when they do the press releases about females who are getting involved in coaching, because what I want to see mentioned in the release is, yeah, it's nice to know they played fast pitch softball, but I want to know, started out as a Little League baseball player. I want to see that mentioned. And did she? Why was not that mentioned? Because to me, that would have been reaffirming to that young girl who wants to play baseball, that, wow, she played, sort of thing. And again, sounds silly, but I think that's important in a press release to mention that. I'm trying to think I think in terms of contributions, what you're looking at, if you studied the game and know the game, I think your players will respect you. And I think the element, if you sound like you are a softball player, nobody's going to listen. But I think she has spent enough time in baseball that she is able to make those, the connections she needs to make. And she sounds like just a great personality to have in the dugout. And again, for some of the guys, I'm sure it's odd for them to have a female running the team. And for me, I worked at a women's college for 20 years. That's a non-issue. If somebody can do the job, and if you're my leader, I'm following you. That's what it's about. I think for substantial change for the players, I think something that needs to happen is for one of the youth organizations to create a girls division for baseball. Little League, like I said, I've gone round and round. I can't tell you how many times with Stephen Keener. And he's old school as far as he was back there in the day when Little League was told that you finally had to start admitting girls back into your baseball program. And he's part of that group that still doesn't like that. I had an incident a few years ago where a player of mine that was from Indonesia was going to advance to the junior baseball level in that country. And she went there and they said, oh, you have to go to softball. And so at that point in time, there were a couple of things that happened before, and I was just really ticked off. So I wrote this letter to the head of the International Baseball Federation and Steve Keener. Now, my emails prior to that from Mr. Keener, probably for the previous year or two, they came as undeliverable. Within 20 minutes, I got a response from Mr. Keener. And the response was, we let girls play baseball. Well, I was looking for a little different wording than that. But that just, in those words, what I heard is that we still don't like the fact that we have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at news articles from 73, 74, 75, early on, you may see articles about girls' baseball, but it's really not, because they were trying to sell softball as the girls' version of baseball. And so every time I see an article like that, I try to take a closer look in the community. And that happened in actually Elmhurst, Illinois.
Oh,
I
am very close to there right now.
Well, in Elmhurst, in 1974 and 75, they had an all-girls baseball league. I've actually interviewed some of the women who played in that league. And that's, for me, it's really cool, because sometimes historically, you're so far removed from the people that you're researching that there's no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And these are the women that played. And it was so fun for them. One of the Saturdays, I remember I came up to Elmhurst and I interviewed one of the coaches. And later that morning, one of his players was going to come in. They hadn't seen each other in like 20 years. And it was like, Coach, how are you?
That's amazing.
It was just really, really fun. And it was just interesting. I mean, they were pursuing this chance to play baseball because the Elmhurst Baseball League, which had been around a long, long time, in the early 70s, there were girls who sent in applications, but come to find out from one of their board members, those applications just were getting tossed in the trash. So nobody was called back. Well, there were a couple of young women who got the call back only because their name could have been male or female, and they showed up at a practice. I spoke with the attorney in Chicago who actually handled, she said it was the first ACLU sports case in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And she had her own story about being that early female lawyer in Chicago.
Yeah, I bet.
But it was interesting because in our conversation, I asked her, I said, now, they created a separate girls' baseball division. And she said, I was totally against that. She's envisioned it, and I think I've got a couple of correspondences that kind of talk about it. She said, it would have been like creating an all African-American league.
Yeah.
Kind of the same thing. But in terms of the participation, I think you were going to get more participation. And so the girls' parents, they decided to go, they said, no, we want to go with the all-girls league, but we want the same fields, we want the same umpires, we want uniforms just like the board. Everything has to be equitable. And it was. And when you hear some of the girls, I was able to actually interview them. And when I did, they were able to ID some of the player photos that were in the Chicago Sun-Times, because they would have just, kind of generic caption, turning a double play at second base. So I had no idea who these young women were. And they said, oh, okay, I recognize her. This is who she is.
Wow.
And interviewed the gentleman who was actually the first commissioner of the league. And he was a young teacher from Massachusetts, and he wanted to get involved with local baseball. So he, went over to the Elmhurst League. And he was the one who told me about them tossing the applications out. And when they decided that they were going to go create the league, he volunteered to serve as commissioner. And so I was able to get from him, color photos of like the first teams that played in 74. And so it was just really, really fun. And I've been working on trying to get all those photos identified.
Very cool. Well, if there is anything I can do to help, I would be. It would be an honor to help you out. That is just so fascinating and
Jonna is
exciting.
our own personal historian here at Babes
Yeah,
Babes.
I'm the one
Tells
who
us all the
really
fun
like
facts.
digs into the history stuff. So if I may, I would love to take us back a little further, briefly. I know we're kind of running out of time, but we normally start our episodes out with what we call Around the Horn. We're missing Madison tonight, our third co-host, and so we'll do an Around the Horn. We ask a icebreaker question. So if I may,
Okay.
Jackie Mitchell, was that a stunt? Or did she really strike out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig?
All right. So having just completed the most detailed biography of Jackie Mitchell, as a coach, I'm going to look in the scorebook and I'm going to see 2 Ks. She struck them out. Also, she is throwing slower than a major league pitcher. I have seen as a coach, and I hate anytime I face a pitcher who's throwing junk, because my players, they think they are going to hit home runs, and those are the pitchers we struggle against.
Right? It throws off their whole cadence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the owner of the Lookouts, he's kind of Sonder Lark. When I was researching her, because she actually has a connection to Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, according to all the stories, Dazzy Vance, who was a Hall of Fame pitcher with the Dodgers, he was pitching for the Memphis Chicks. And while he was in Memphis, the Mitchell family lived here a short period of time. He supposedly taught Jackie to throw. Now, I have searched every record that I can find to see if I can find the Mitchells and Dazzy Vance here at the same time. I come close. I can tell you that in like 1918, Vance is with the Chicks. I have a tough time as a historian because there is a name in the city directory. Jackie's dad was Joseph S. Mitchell, optometrist. I find a John S. Mitchell living in Memphis. This is the only year he is here. The very next year, the Mitchells are in Chattanooga. Are they the same? Genealogist in me says, I can't make that leap because, well, city directory at that time is not listing a spouse's name. And that would have sealed it for me. Because if I would have saw Mitchell's wife's name, I could say, yep, Bernie, that's who it is. And what's sad about Jackie, everybody focuses, literally every book, except the one that I put together, focuses in on 2/3 of an inning of her life. Now, granted, yes, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, they're very important, but she pitched in over 100 games. She pitched for the House of David. She pitched for Buck Lay's Hawaiians in 1937. In fact, I think the first 14 or 16 games she pitched for the Hawaiians. She would do this thing where she would start and pitch the opening inning. She went 14 straight games without having a run scored against her. And a lot of times she'll say, well, they weren't trying. Well, all you have to do is to read the newspaper account. And it's like, well, so-and-so hit a hard smash to third base. All right, so that sounds like he was trying.
Yeah.
But there are other components where Mitchell actually, she's an athletic comparable to Babe Diedrichson. All right, they're playing in the same era. And there's a point in time where Mitchell's manager, I'm pretty sure it's her manager as opposed to Jackie, because Jackie was a relatively low-key, quiet sort of person from what I can gather from a lot of the interviews that I've read. Her manager basically said that she was better than Babe Diedrichson on the mound, and he will set up a time, any place for the two of them to throw against each other. And Diedrichson responds to this saying, dude, if I responded to every claim like this, I would never have time to do anything else. So it never materialized. But Jackie did play for Babe Diedrichson's All-American basketball team. And the other little component, because Jackie played basketball as well in Chattanooga, but the very last athletic venue she was playing in is a basketball team called Stars of the World. Now, I have yet to find a win that this team compiled. Most of their games, they had 5 people. They were playing men's teams. But what was fascinating is the guy running their team was Grover Cleveland Alexander.
Wow.
So Mitchell and Alexander would have had a prior, because the year Mitchell was playing for the House of David, Alexander was managing the other House of David team. The 2 teams met in Benton Harbor, so they would have at least physically been in the same ballpark. So I'm wondering if he recruited her. But more importantly, and I just finished a biography of Alexander, because I was looking for a mention that he coached this women's basketball team. There's nothing.
Huh.
And I think he was given that opportunity to get his name more in the news so that he would be elected to the Hall of Fame, because he had some struggles off the field. And with this team, you would see him, he would come and he would do a talk beforehand. So Grover Cleveland's in the news with this traveling women's baseball team, traveling over the frigid northern part of the Midwest. And I wonder if that somehow was part of a springboard to get him elected to the Hall of Fame. But until I find that Grover Cleveland expert to see if they know of this or can shed some more light on it, based on all the news articles that I read and when he kind of comes into it, to me it makes sense that's how it timed out.
Wow. That's fascinating. I'm excited to dig into your book.
I know it's got to be tricky to get all these like quick leads on things and then choose which rabbit hole, to really go down and keep exploring.
There were tons of rabbit holes. So
yeah,
the thing about her and Dazzy Vance, there was I want to say like a 1934 newspaper photo of the 2 of them together. Having been in the newspaper field when I was just out of college, thinking about cut lines that I would have used. Why was a cut line that said, something like teacher meets former pupil, something like that? You look at the photo, you read the cut line, and if you didn't know anything else about Jackie Mitchell, you would swear this is the first time these 2 people were meeting. And yet in Vance's biography, a couple of his family members said that every time the Mitchells saw him, they thanked him for helping Jackie. But nothing specifically from like Vance himself, or nothing in the newspapers to that corroborate that. So yeah, you follow all sorts of like little rabbit holes. I think the most fun chapter from Jackie's book is I parsed interviews. It's like Jackie's voice, because she passed away in 1987. So this is her chance to comment on a variety of things: Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mom, Dad, House of David. And so again, just a lot of wonderful interviews that I pulled key pieces. And so like the title of the book is basically, it was The Girl That Loved Baseball. And that was one of her lines. She said, "I love playing baseball."
Aww. The Girl Who Loved Baseball. And that's
A
all
girl
about
after our heart.
Jackie Mitchell. Okay, so Jana is the historian. I, being the actor, am very fascinated in like the media, but also the business side of baseball. So I want to go back to the Women in Baseball exhibit that you just curated that we can see in Cincinnati, February 26th. So coming up any day here now. Does it also include some background and history on women in baseball on the broadcasting end and on like the executive end as well?
Okay, so there are a variety of little stories, because you could do major storylines in broadcasting, you could do storylines in umpiring. Um, the bulk is going to feature the players on the field, but you will see within the timelines various mentions, just so you have some some notices about what's going on. There, one of the fun things that I had was I think it was a program from a tournament in Washington D.C. General manager of the Miami Marlins. Lo and behold, she was on the Chicago Storm roster. And I know I remember some of the players on the Storm talking about that. So I have every scorebook from every season that I have coached. So I pulled out that book because I wanted to see, because I know we played the Chicago Storm and I wanted to see if she played. But she did not. In fact, I honestly don't know, even though she was on the roster, I don't know if she did actually play in the game. I think her sister appeared in one of the games, and I remember running her across her sister in a couple other tournaments along the way too. But I thought it was really kind of cool because I had one of the autograph baseball cards of her with that program, just so you kind of see the connection. So see, here's the general manager. See, she player on this roster.
Well, you made such a great call out earlier too about like what we may not know about Rachel Baklovek's, prior experience in baseball specifically. And that's such another good one of Kim Ng, of like, how did she get into the world of baseball? Because, representation is a huge conversation in our world today, and rightly so. But John and I were just talking before you hopped on about how, since 2019, there's so many more public facing roles that are filled by women in Major League Baseball now, and how huge that is. So seeing people like Kim Ng, or even Melanie Newman, the play-by-play for the Orioles, and Sarah Lang, MLB Network analyst, like people like that, how is that going to affect the next generation and the evolution of the sport for women?
I think in some of the, because along with doing like the timeline, there are also quite a number of images that I sent to Cincinnati to reproduce. And I want to think that in those, there are a couple of broadcasters. There's a broadcaster, I want to say from the 40s, from maybe Cincinnati. And there's even a wonderful shot of, she was one of the early official scorekeepers. And so you have this woman in this flowery print dress and this wonderful, very large hat. When I think of an official scorekeeper, that's probably not the image that I have, but it was just kind of interesting because that was the imagery of the era. Oftentimes when you look at if you look at books in a bookstore that feature a female player or female baseball team, typically those books are probably going to outnumber the books about the softball player, which is interesting because culturally we would think that would be reversed.
Right.
I've done a couple of popular culture presentations on that aspect. Things like the logo that Little League Baseball has, not the Keystone, but the Little League Baseball and the Little League Softball logo. So there was a point in time where boys could just play in a softball program, no questions asked, just the way girls can play in the baseball program. However, there was an incident in the early 2000s where a junior girls softball team showed up and it had 3 boys on it. One of the international teams said, "We're not playing a team with boys." They forfeited. Little League was horrified. The very next week, Little League created boys softball. And the week after that, they announced that the first boys softball World Series was going to be in Tampa, Florida. But when you get to through all the information in the article, the very last paragraph, it says, the program was conceived because there were between 500 and 1,000 boys in the United States playing baseball. That's nice. But it's the line after that that makes you say, what? In Little League Baseball, at that point in time, there were about 100,000 girls. So you have 100,000 compared to 1,000. The 1,000 get a program, the 100,000 don't.
Wow.
Some folks at Little League have told me that one of the reasons that they would conceive why you couldn't do that is, well, there'd be too much of a demand for fields. There are not enough fields to go around. And I said, but the key thing is you're keeping those players in your program. I think the first youth program who offers girls baseball is going to suck away players from all those leagues that don't. And it will take a short period of time. And all those leagues, I'll guarantee you, will now suddenly offer this baseball program for girls. Had Little League in 74 created that division, today you would find in college, you'd have the men's and women's college baseball World Series. Think about that. Mm-hmm. And who knows, because you're able to track from youth through college, who's to say that you would not have a pro women's baseball league? Because people don't realize that even if you take an outstanding softball player, you can't turn them into a baseball player in like a month.
Sure.
Because if you've been trained for 15 years to play a game a certain way, and some of the women on Team USA have told me that that's a thing that sometimes holds the national team back, is that USA Baseball thinks that they can just retrain, reprogram good softball players. Great athletes they are, it's a different game. A few years ago at a World Cup, one of the really strong U.S. pitchers was on the mound, and a couple of balls got by the outfield, and to this day, she swears that they were playing way too shallow. They were playing a softball depth, and they could not cut a ball off that was hit that hard. Said, well, what should have been a single was, there were triples.
Wow. Yeah.
So all sorts
What was a book that you said you co-authored again about the difference between baseball and softball? Because I got to look that up.
Actually, it's if you go on the Women's Sports Foundation website, it's a position paper on baseball versus softball.
Okay.
Excellent.
Add that to my reading list.
Yes, definitely. Well, then we'll have to have you come back and we can discuss further in detail.
Yeah, after we review it, after we do our homework.
I said there are so many fun stories, that was able to try to touch upon for the Cincinnati exhibit. Like I said, Maud Nelson, who had nearly a 50-year career. She spanned the 1890s, and her last players who played for her played in the All-American League. And yet when she passes away, her obituary from the Chicago newspapers, they just kind of casually mentioned that she played for the old Boston Bloomers. It was like, no, she was way more than that.
Right, because she went on to own them. She was a scout.
She was a really smart owner, because early on, she would always go in with a partner. And so at any point in time, she could sell her half to the partner and go on to create her next team. I have a postcard of the Western Bloomer girls, and actually on the back side, and it's the only piece I've ever seen that actually has Maud kind of dickering with somebody to maybe manage the Western Bloomer girls the next season. It is just really, really cool. I've never seen any sort of correspondence from her like that. And luckily, I said it was on the back of this postcard, and it wasn't even one of the featured items, featured points of this card. And I said, well, yeah, that's actually more important than the photo that's on the back side. But yeah, you have all sorts of stories. Lizzie Arlington, who first female to play professionally in 1898. A lot of people think Jackie Mitchell was the first, and you see that in the news articles in 1931. But again, you're almost 4 decades removed from Arlington. Arlington just she grew up in Mahanoy City, Pennsylvania, as did Clementina Breida. When she came over to the United States, that's where she settled. And I'm almost positive that nearby town, there was a major league pitcher, and I think he may have been the one to show both Lizzie and at that point in time Clementina to throw a baseball. And for a while, they probably 2 or 3 years they were teammates before they kind of split directions.
Very cool.
Just all sorts of stories.
And then a little down the road, you've got Maggie Riley, the female version of Babe Ruth.
Female Babe Ruth, yes, that's when you kind of carry that, and you on the front of your uniform, when it says Maggie Riley, you know who the star is. And that's like I said, when you get those, and again in like the 20s and 30s, a lot of times you see that again, that one female name that kind of crops up, and a lot of times statistically, if you're able to find full box scores, and I think for some of these women, to try and build that kind of database, oftentimes the female teams did not get the same coverage, maybe in terms of copy, yes, but in terms of seeing statistically what kind of numbers did you put together. So you're pulling partial numbers. It was kind of the case with Jackie Mitchell. I mean, I can tell you like games that she started when she was younger. I could find the complete games because they were running full box scores, but not necessarily would it give me all the information I needed to know to fill out her chart statistically. Unless it said, she was unscored upon, or I would look in the line score and see a 0. I thought, all right, nobody scored any runs on her. So yeah, trying to build statistical databases oftentimes is difficult, especially for the early players. But sometimes you find some really cool stories about plays they make, or games they either pitch or hits that they made. And so you try to at least save PDF copies of those, because, well, if you tried to go back and find it, you probably never would find it again.
Yeah, definitely.
Wild.
There is one of the photos that I sent to Cincinnati has this. It's an American Legion team, and on the front of the jersey it says Edith Ayres. So what attracted me, first of all, is like, all right, so why are these guys wearing a uniform with a woman's name on it? So it's like, oh, new research topic, right? So Edith Ayres was a World War I era nurse. In fact, she was one of the first deaths, U.S. deaths in World War I. She was on a carrier ship leaving New York, heading to France, when during some, it sounds like war game exercises, a shell hit the deck of the ship that she was on and exploded and killed her and another nurse. And so there was an American Legion post in Cleveland that was named for her. I think it was post 408. And sadly, trying to find out the entire, I know when the post started. I've not been able through the American Legion to find out when that post started, became non-functional anymore. But yeah, the Edith Ayres post 408. So it was just interesting because so at the point in time where in American Legion, where females could not play baseball, the boys were wearing a uniform with a female's name on it.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, quick question before we wrap things up. Will you be at the Reds Hall of Fame, or not Hall of Fame, but their opening day parade this year?
All right. I probably will not. The school year, handling the substitutes here is kind of a mix and match gig. I want to make sure everything's covered, because if I can't find a sub to cover, then I'm in the classroom, which is a lot of fun. I mean, I love the kids here at the high school. But I've told the Reds that should they want to do something, in and around the exhibit, let's say during like spring break, I most gladly come up, and then during the season, love to do like some gallery tours or some talks to for the fans who come to see the exhibit, because again, I think it helps to be able to answer some of the questions I've tried to feed as much information as I can, but I mean, there's some things that a tour guide might not fully be able to answer. And I'm just kind of like to give them the perspective of, somebody who has not only worked with the history of females in the game, but who have coached female baseball players, because again, it's something that has really gone together well.
Yeah, so that's my last question for you is, obviously we grew up in families that recognize the importance or didn't shy away from taking daughters to the ballpark. And, we very much follow the game and feel like a part of it because of that. But what advice do you have for whether it be parents or young girls or even women who have grown up loving the sport, seeking out those resources that they may not know are available to them to be more a part of the world of baseball?
Well, I can tell you that before you had, the internet, it was very difficult. You could have pockets who were even successful teams playing small leagues but you'd never know unless you ran across somebody who moved into your community who had played in that league. You could very easily search, just very generic out, U.S. women's baseball tournaments, and you're going to find several of those hits to come up with. And a lot of times that'll take you to either a league or tournament site, and I'll tell you the teams that are competing. And oftentimes through those, you're going to be able to find the links to get to where you want to go. As far as, if it's an area that, hey, I live very close by there, see if they're looking for players. And to me, it's a very welcoming community. One of the unique aspects is it's not unusual to have a women's team playing in a tournament who could have a 13-year-old and a 52-year-old on the same roster. And now think about that as like a parent. And let's say you have a son, all right? So your son's a good ball player, and he's 12, 13. And this adult baseball team sees him and says, hey, your kid's pretty good. We've got a tournament in Detroit next week. Can we take your kid along? What would be your first reaction? And yet, parents, when they find that opportunity for their daughters, will go above and beyond.
Yeah.
Molly McKesson, who played college baseball here in Memphis, I remember playing down in Florida in Memorial Day tournaments against Molly's team from Ocala when she was like 12 or 13. And again, the average age of her team was easily 30. So, but that was her opportunity. And eventually for her, it led to that opportunity to play Division II college baseball.
Incredible.
You have to continue to look for opportunities and push within your community. If you go to a sign up and your daughter wants to play baseball, make sure that you go to that line. And if they say, well, but we have softball for girls. And what you sometimes run into with youth organizations is the turnover is going to be as players age out, new volunteers will come in. Not everybody is going to know that they actually can play baseball. And so you just have to push a little bit. What's fun is that some of the young women who do play, let's say on more or less traditional boys teams, generally every year they're going to get interviewed, especially if they do it over a number of years. By the time they get to high school, they by far and away are an outstanding interview because they know what questions are going to be asked. They handle it like old pros, and it's fun to see that cadence. But eventually, they just want to play ball. They don't, they just want to be that teammate. They don't want to be that person on the team. So it's hard. It's really hard. But if that's what you want to do, you follow your heart. And if you play as long as you can, and then there are other avenues in baseball that you can follow. I know young women who were decent ball players who said, well, maybe umpiring is a faster track for me, and I get to stay in baseball. do that. Lots of opportunities. And same thing with if you're in high school, get involved with coaching baseball. Doesn't matter if you have any girls on your team, if you have all girls on your team. Right. It's good for those boys to see a female who knows baseball and can help them become better ball players. You have to do that because, again, when you as you get older, you're going to face a lot of those same obstacles, and if you can find a way to work with them as in your youth, it's going to make you even stronger as an adult.
I think that's really helpful to know too, that it might not look conventional, but that doesn't mean the opportunity isn't there.
Absolutely. Our favorite slogan is "Babes belong in baseball."
For sure, that is the truth. And I said it's the bar has to keep being pushed.
Thanks for pushing us up, backing us up, John. And we'll keep an eye out for you. Hopefully you'll get up to Cincinnati soon. And maybe we've been talking about, we need to plan our road trip to Great American because it's on our list. And especially now that the Women in Baseball exhibit is going to be there. So
what is it? Last summer, my wife and I actually, when we went up initially to talk with the curatorial staff, we took in a ball game, and I'm thinking, wow, this is like an awesome ballpark. I would take season tickets here, and kind of the same thing. My oldest daughter and son-in-law live in Pittsburgh, and went to see the Pirates play, and it's like, what a great ballpark. It's just a shame they don't have a good team.
I know that one's on my list too. Do you follow a specific? Do you follow a specific team right now?
All right, so long time ago, I was a diehard Cubs fan.
Oh,
Ernie Banks, Glenn, Don Kessinger, Ron Santo, Billy.
All right.
But the Cubs made a fatal mistake for this fan. They chose to put in lights. They took away the most unique aspect in all of Major League Baseball. I cast away my Cub fandom. And at that point in time, I latched myself onto the Boston Red Sox.
No!
I was going to say, wow, making lots of friends here.
Oh, man.
Well, at that point,
this is not how we end things.
The Red Sox were in the same boat as the Cubs, and I thought, well, it's only a natural progression, right? Team that, they have some good players, but they just never quite get to the end. And I'll never forget the playoff game that Wakefield came in and gave up the home run that pretty much ended it. And we're all set to go to the World Series, and my daughter, who was a Nomar Garcia Parra fan, mind you, a left-hander who had no qualms about playing that left-handed shortstop, had to wake her up the next morning and say, well, guess what? Spring training starts next year. But yeah.
Do you still follow the Red Sox?
I do. And it's just interesting watching, some of the interesting personalities. I was very bummed about Xander Bogaerts, because I really feel that, and a lot of it has to do with, of course, the way that contracts are now. But so many times growing up, for me, you had career players. I mean, Ernie Banks was always a Cub. He didn't go someplace else.
Right.
Ron Santo, he spent a year with the White Sox, but he's a Cub. Let's be honest, he's a Cub. That is a unique aspect that your fan base, I think, really kind of counts on, almost as much, I think, sometimes as winning. Because especially if they've come through your system, you may have seen them in Class A, Double A. Who was it? Delano DeShields. So he played in Rockford. His dad was a major league player. Delano came up and ended up, he was in Class A with Rockford, And like a year or two later, he was in AAA and happened to be in Indianapolis. And he said, well, let's go see Indy play tonight. And he was on the roster. I thought, oh, that's great. So literally the only game he was in Indianapolis, he's walking to the plate. I took a photo of him walking to the plate, so the scoreboard has his name. The very next day, he got called up to Montreal. So
Wow.
it's like, yeah, I can document he was there because this is it.
Yeah, this was the one time.
One time. But yeah, there's just so many aspects about baseball history. You know, as you kind of play all sorts of different things through your mind from, let's say, like when you played, or comparisons. And can you compare players from the 20s to players today? There's so many things that are different. I would like to see, let's say, Ohtani hit against a spitball, play with no lights on. And as I mentioned, Stanley Kovalevsky, who lived in South Bend, he was one of the last legal spitball pitchers. And he told me stories about, they would, in a major league game, they would use a ball. And this ball would literally be black. And they're not playing with lights. So can you imagine trying to hit this ball like at dusk, a ball that's like dropping down? He had on his leg, I interviewed him when I was in high school. And actually the best interview was not him, it was his wife. Frances was a pistol. And she was actually an inspiration for me when I was working with the folks to plan the Baseball Hall of Fame in South Bend for the stadium. We were sitting waiting for Stan to get back from fishing, and we asked her a lot of different questions about Stan's career, and asked her about the Hall of Fame. And she sat up, she said, if the Hall of Fame would have called me after the man had died, I would have told them what they could do with their award. If you can't honor somebody when they're still living, don't honor them at all. So I kept that in the back of my mind. And so as we were inducting folks, I tried to get as many individuals who I know were still living in the community, families living in the community. And we actually had a minor league pitcher inducted first or second year. It was from a large farming community just outside of South Bend. 13 brothers and sisters. One brother still living at the time, but he ended up at his Hall of Fame plaque induction. I think there were 137 family members, including his brother, who left a hospital in Florida to fly to South Bend so he could see his brother's plaque unveiled.
That is
wow.
Wow.
So, but yeah, the double duty Radcliffe, a Negro League pitcher catcher, spent a year playing in South Bend Factory League baseball. And so when we started an over 30 baseball league, we actually had three divisions. One was named for Gene Fout, one was named for double duty Radcliffe, and another was for Roy Root, who was a local baseball manager. And so I actually brought double duty to South Bend to throw out a first pitch. And so he goes out, to the mound, throws the pitch across. The next thing I know, I find double duty sitting in the stands. Now, you have to understand, at this time, Duty is about 92, and he has this pack of baseball cards. And so I was kind of curious. I mean, wow, he had all these cards of himself. So I go down, I'm sitting back of them, and they were Perez Steele, the artist, his card series from the Negro Leagues. So if he pulled out Josh Gibson's card, he signed Josh Gibson, gave it to a kid. I'm going to correct, I was 92, right? So like a decade goes by, and we're doing these Hall of Fame inductions. And I had tried for like 2 years to get the South Bend White Sox to bring Ted to South Bend to unveil his plaque. And I said, guys, you're really starting to push the envelope here when he's like 98, 99. So finally, when he was turning 100, I said, all right, so we're gonna bring him to South Bend. Great. So we're waiting for Duty to arrive, and waiting. And I'm thinking to myself, I'll bet he died. And now you guys are going to be stuck with a plaque.
No.
Oh, no.
Duty came in about 6:20. And at this point in time, because he was 100, he was not walking a lot. So he had a great nephew who kind of wheeled him in a wheelchair, and we took him downstairs and we were out on the field, and we unveiled his plaque, and we rolled his chair in front of the mound, and he looked at his nephew and he said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, are you going to throw for me?" He said, "No, roll me at the top of the mound." Okay. So we rolled him up to the mound. He said, "Now help me up. Duty doesn't throw from a chair."
Duty
So
calls.
we can, I could just see so many things bad happening at this instance. I've got a 100-year-old guy standing on top of a hill, and he's going to go forward. Well, Duty took a little step, tossed a ball, split the plate, catchers, sat back down. I'm good now.
Like riding a bike, even at 100.
Yep. So,
Oh, well, John,
that's
I
an
don't know.
awesome story to end on.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to hear more and more stories. So we'll have to pick a lane and invite you back sometime, because, man, I could just listen to all of the depths of your knowledge and fun stories like that forever. But thank you so much for spending time with us, taking the time out.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun, like I said, and I enjoyed watching that second podcast, and I'm now going to go back tomorrow and watch the first one, so I'll be all up to date. But yeah, you guys look like you're having a blast, and that draws people in for sure.
We are John Kovach endorsed now here at Babes. Well, we can't wait to see your work up at the Hall of Fame Museum in Cincinnati. And thanks again. It has been an absolute pleasure.